Fire and Emergency Services Instructor, 8th Edition, Chapter 2, Principles of Learning.
So in the book, they have this thing called the sensory stimulus theory. And it states that the 5 senses are used as the primary tool set for learning. Now here are learning percentages, as you can see on the screen. Most people learn by seeing, 75% do. Others combine, 12%. Hearing, 13%. So by this, you can assume that a good majority of the learning that is going to be done by seeing, either on a PowerPoint or a hands-on evolution or things like that. The student is going to have to see what they're doing in order to get it down in the first place. This is called the cone of learning. It describes information retained in the classroom. And we've heard this before. There's a passive side to this, which is up here, and there is an active side, which is here. So we learn 10% by reading, 20% by hearing, 30% by seeing, 50% by hearing and seeing, and then the numbers jump up to 70% saying and repeating, and 90% saying and performing. So as an instructor, you're going to have to use your knowledge of this cone of learning and make sure that not only are you talking about things, but you're getting them out in front of the students. For example, the learning activity that we just did. You guys actually saw and did a response to a given scenario. So the chances of you retaining that are very high. But if you just read it in a book, you're not going to understand it as much as hearing about it, or seeing about it, or seeing and doing about it, or saying and repeating. Does that make sense? That's why a lot of instructors will use multiple modes of teaching in order to engage each student in their classroom. So by that, what is the most effective mode of learning? Saying and performing. So you want to make sure that the student can say it, and you want to make sure that the student can do it. Let's talk about Knowles' theory. It gives assumptions to effectively teaching adults. So there's a science of teaching kids, and there's a science of teaching adults. And you have to remember that you can't teach like you're teaching kids to adults, and you can't teach what you're teaching to adults to kids, vice versa. So the assumptions are that they have a self-concept, they have some form of experience, they have a readiness to learn, they have a learning orientation, and they have a certain level of motivation that is going along with that at the same time. So let's talk about Thorndike and his laws of learning. So we've got readiness, we've got exercise, we've got effect, we've got disuse, we've got association, recency, primacy, and intensity. So each one of these things will determine how your student retains the information. They have to be ready to receive the information. So instead of coming in here and just going all willy-nilly, like when we started this exercise, and say, hey guys, we need to get ready to switch over to do chapter 2. So that was my giving you a readiness cue to make sure you're ready to receive the next information I had to give you. Disuse is an example. If you take what we talked about in the classroom tonight and you don't use it for a long period of time, you won't be able to use it moving forward. It will fall into disuse, and it'll be something you'll have to reteach to yourself. Recency talks about how current the data is, how not soon, but when you learn that data, that information. For example, I'm sure, Chief, you have a wealth of knowledge on hazmat stuff. Now, there's some stuff that you may have a better knowledge of because you've used it more recently than others, and I'm sure there's stuff in your skill set that has just kind of been sitting there off to the wayside for a while. And the stuff that you've covered most recently is the most fresh in your memory. Agree or disagree, sir? All right. Primacy talks about where the information falls in the category, the primacy. They're going to remember the first thing that they were taught or the first thing that they were told. And then intensity has to do with, obviously, the intensity in which it was taught. Thorndike's laws of learning, we just talked about them. Explain the characteristics of adult learners. Now, we're all adults, we're all learners, we're all educators as well. Why is it important for us to find the most effective ways of learning for students? Okay. Okay. Wes? Okay. So let's say you're a visual learner, and I tell you how to do something. Do you think you're going to retain it as much? Let's say you're a spoken learner, Mr. Emberton. Let's say that you're a spoken learner. Are you going to learn by reading? So you have all these different styles of learning in a classroom. And as an instructor, you have to kind of figure it out and work the puzzle pieces to get the most bang out of your buck for the instruction time. That's why a lot of these courses are going to flipped classrooms and things like that, is to engage multiple levels of multiple levels of students at the same time. So we could have well just sat there and talked about chapter 1, the instructor being a professional. We could have gone straight into chapter 2. Instead, we stopped at the end of chapter 1. We did the learning activity, which reinforced what? What did the learning activity at the end of chapter 1 reinforce? Okay, and what do we talk about? Ethics, honor, all of your stuff, okay. Personal characteristics and outside influences affect how students learn. So you've got the 3 circles up there, and you can kind of see the middle points of all of them. You've got students that have life experiences and responsibilities. So, for example, if I am teaching, and Chief Allison, I'll go back to you on this one. If I'm teaching hazmat stuff, and you know that a good 25% of the stuff I'm saying is inaccurate, how's that going to affect how I teach to you? Precisely. So let's say, I don't know, what are you good at, Jordan? What's a good skill of yours?
A good skill of mine?
Yeah. Yeah, fire type. Just your experiences in fire. So if I'm sitting up here talking about, positive pressure ventilation, and I say something wrong, and you're like, no, that's wrong. You have to understand that students have life experiences that are different from yours. If it's hazmat, there's 3 or 4 guys I know who'll have the answer. If it's extrication, there's 3 or 4 guys I know that are going to have the answer. You have to take that into consideration when you're teaching students. If I'm teaching a class of guys that have been in the service for maybe a year, year and a half, 2 years, we're not going to talk about older tactics and older styles. We're going to talk about those newer tactics and reinforce their education there, and then move forward to teach other stuff. Students have to be motivated to learn. You guys are all obviously motivated to be here. You're here in the classroom. I see all of you are engaged at this point in time still, thankfully. But you all have the motivation to come in here and do it. Now let's go to a Fire 1-2 class with candidates that have only been on the fire department for 4 months. What kind of motivation do you think you're going to have there with them? Okay. Now let's say you're teaching the same course to a group of guys who've been around 5 to 10 years. What do you think their motivation is going to be? And what about your advanced guys? 25 plus years on. Precisely. So you have to engage your class around that. So I knew coming into this class that Chief Allison was going to be one of my students. So I have to, at times, engage Chief Allison just to make sure that, him and I are on the same wavelength. He's got different experiences than I do, and I can tap on that, and I can use that to my advantage. So if Somebody has a hazmat question, they can go to him. Make sense? But all your students have to have a little bit of motivation. You also have to have a little bit of self-confidence to come in and learn. You have to have confidence that what you're being taught can be sucked into your mind. I hate heights. I'm telling you right now, I hate them. Right? Have you ever seen me on a roof ladder? Probably never will. I'm not going to turn around and teach roof laddering and throwing ladders to a group of students because that's not what I do. I do EMS stuff. I do some vehicle extrication. I do hybrid vehicles well. I don't do ground ladders, and I don't do ladders, period. That's not something I want to teach, nor is it something. And I had the most horrible time in fire school throwing ladders, but I got through it because I was motivated to get through it. And the teachers and the instructors gave me the self-confidence to know that I wasn't going to fall off that ladder and crack my head on the sidewalk. Make sense? You have to respect your students for their abilities, their experiences, and their individuality. You're going to have students that are different ages. You're going to have students that are different genders. And you're going to have students that have a different cultural and ethnic background throughout your class. I know at least 2 or 3 of us here came from the city. Some of you guys live out in the country. You have different culture and different skill sets, or you have a different cultural background than everyone else in the class. But you have to respect the students for those abilities, their experiences, and their individuality. And you can take those traits and teach to that student. What are some common characteristics of adult learners? Just talked about them, guys. Experience. Some education on the subject. Okay. Mr. Dilly? Motivation. Anybody else? Let's talk about the 3 domains of learning. You have the cognitive, you have the psychomotor, and you have the affective. What's a big one we use in the fire service? What do we do a lot of? We do a lot of psychomotor. What is psychomotor learning? Hands-on basic. How about EMS? How much psychomotor stuff do we do in EMS? All your skills. There you go. Cognitive. What's our cognitive learning process? Okay. Reading, studying, brain matter. How about affective? What's the affective domain all about? Let's look that one up. How do you think that affective domain is going to handle with those older veteran firefighters that you're teaching an extrication class? And they will not be afraid to tell you that you don't know anything. We see that a lot, don't we? Volunteer, combination, full-time paid. We see that a lot. The older guys. You go to the older guys, you try to teach them a new skill. I don't need that. We fought fire differently 25 years ago. We don't need that. Something to keep in mind. Something exactly to keep in mind. That's a big one. Because if you have students, if you have 1 or 2 students that have a poor attitude about what you're teaching, guess what they're going to do? They're going to take your entire classroom and turn them against you. It gets to the point. What's that? What's actually taken away from you in a second? Precisely. So you have to be very careful about attitudes when you engage all different members of your department. And you're going to have to use all 3 of these domains of learning in order to get your point across and teach. What are the 3 domains of learning? Just talk about them. Cognitive, psychomotor, affective. Summarize the different styles of learning. A learning style is one specific way that a person gathers and processes information. Hands-on, reading, combination of both. Come again? Listening, seeing. Let's go back to a few slides before. Let's talk about that cone of learning. 90% of your students are going to learn how? Combination, active. What should we do to address different learning styles? Incorporate all of them. Mix it up. Keep watching your students. If they're on point, if they're on with you, they'll be looking directly at you, looking for everything you're feeding them. They're not interested, they'll be texting, playing on their phone, playing the great train game or whatever it is that is played. Time for a break. Because you don't want to lose those students. If you got like a class of 15 and half of them are looking at the ceiling, the other half are checking their watches and rubbing their eyes and yawning, it's probably time for you to take a break because you've lost your students. That's why we take a break as often as we can to make sure we're still feeding out that bite-sized information to you. So what are some strategies that we use in the fire and emergency services to teach? Sequential or linear. In line. How it goes on the scene. Establish command. Establish water supply. Establish attack. Establish overhaul salvage. Establish investigations. Linear in a line. Abstract or symbolic. Kind of the thinking outside of the box thing. Concrete or real objects, learning about real things that you can hold, that you can grasp and move around. Global or holistic. So how does this relate to success in an educational environment as far as motivation? It's a key to helping students achieve their best. You make the information relevant, you have goals, you have enthusiasm, and you have performance. Any Tom, Dick, Harry could come in here and talk to you guys about being instructors. Okay? Anybody could come in here and read off the slides and kind of, do their whole thing. But you have to be motivated to teach what you're teaching. Am I going to teach ground ladders? No, not at all. Far from it. What's your best skill as far as you're concerned? Search and rescue. So you're going to be doing, you're going to specialize in Project Lifesaver and ground search and all the different urban and rural search tactics. You'd be good to teach that to someone else since you're bought in on that subject. Make sense? You guys still with it? We good? Motivational techniques. Motivators, participation, and variety. What is one common motivator you guys have seen before? Instructor comes in, has a big bag, sets it right in front of him. What's that? Reward. I've seen candy bars, I've seen movie tickets, I've seen all kinds of stuff used as a motivator to get a class engaged and involved. You have to keep them participating. I'm asking you guys every once in a while, I'll go around the room and I'll look at Joby. And I'll call him out for a minute and say, hey, what do you think about such and such? Because I want to keep you participating. Because I want to make sure that the information I'm sending you is getting to where it needs to be. And if it's not, I need to change my instructional technique and start directing information so that you can understand it. Sticking to candy bars? And you have to mix it up. You have to have variety. You can't just do, okay, good job, okay, good job. You have to have variety when you do that. Effective instructors understand the principles of learning and use them to aid in their interpretation of plans and preparations for instruction. Instructors should recognize how adult learners are unique as individuals. Effective instructors understand that a variety of strategies and styles are needed to reach a diverse audience. Is this a diverse audience? What do you think? How so? Okay. Okay. We got a mix. We got a good mix. Instructors must use motivation to help students be successful in the classroom. And that's lesson 2.